Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Okay, we are in our chapter on mastering the mind, and the section on the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the establishing of mindfulness. And so far we have covered 3 of the Satipatthanas, 3 of the ways of establishing mindfulness based on the body, on feelings, and on states of mind. Now we come to the 4th foundation of mindfulness, or the 4th way of establishing mindfulness. And this is called, in Pali, this is called Dhammanupassana. I'll write that on the board. Okay, the key word here in Dhammanupassana is the word Dhamma. And this word Dhamma has so many different meanings that it's something of a problem, even a puzzle, exactly how to translate Dhammanupassana. Some of the earlier translators took Dhamma to have the meaning of mind objects. And this is because the word Dhamma is used to represent, we have an analysis of the domains of experience into 6 types of sense objects. We have the objects of the eye are forms, objects of the sound of the ear is sound, object perceived through the nose is odors, object perceived through the tongue are tastes, objects perceived through the body sense are textures or tactile sensations. And then the 6th class of objects in the Buddhist analysis, the objects of the mind or reflection, these are called dhammas. And so this has been translated in a very general way as mind objects. And some translators understood Dhammanupassana to mean the contemplation of mind objects. So they think that first one passes through citta, the 3rd foundation of mindfulness, as mind. Then one comes to the 4th foundation of mindfulness, which means the objects of the mind, dhammas. But I don't think this understanding is correct. But it's still a little bit of a puzzle how to understand Dhammanupassana, because no explicit explanation is given in the suttas themselves. And even the commentaries, the classical commentaries, are not very clear exactly what's meant by Dhammanupassana. But I think we can find some indication of what's intended if we look at what Dhammanupassana involves. Under Dhammanupassana we have 5 groups of factors that are objects of contemplation. What are these 5 groups of objects? we have the 5 hindrances, then we have the 5 aggregates, then we have the 6 pairs of internal and external sense bases. In other words, the 6 sense faculties and their respective objects. Then the 7 factors of enlightenment, and finally the 4 noble truths. So what is striking about these 5 groups of factors that are to be contemplated is that these are groups which are quite particular to the Buddha's teaching. And the Buddha's teaching, the general term for the Buddha's teaching, is Dhamma. And yet what seems to be the case is that we have Dhammesu Dhammanupassi Viharati. We have a plural being used here. So these are, the way I understand it, that these are categories or groups of categories which are established based on the Buddha's teaching. Okay, groups of categories which are based on the Buddha's teaching and which are to be developed in order to gain essence, to gain insight into the essence of the Buddha's teaching. And we could say that the essence of the Buddha's teaching is summed up or expressed by the 4 noble truths, which is the last group to be contemplated under Dhammanupassana. And so what is taking place in Dhammanupassana is that the Buddha is organizing factors of experience into particular groups, and these particular groups are subordinated to the aim of the Buddha's teaching, which is the realization of the 4 noble truths. And so these 5 groups are groups governed by the aim of the Dhamma. They're groups of factors, groups of phenomena, groups of dhammas, factors of existence, organized in a particular way. So as to lead to the realization of the core or essence of the Dhamma. Now when we look at the 5 groups, when we take the sort of panoramic view of them, we can see a particular progression taking place. Let me write them down so it will be clearer. Now if we look at these 5 groups of factors, we can see some kind of progression is involved here. At least this is the way I see it. Okay, we begin with the 5 nivarana. These are the 5 mental hindrances. And so, at the beginning of contemplation, one has to confront, remedy, and overcome these 5, we call these defilements of the mind, obstructions of the mind, which hinder, which block one's progress in the development of meditation. And so the 5 hindrances are considered to be the barriers, the obstacles to both concentration or samadhi, and the obstacles to insight, to vipassana. Now when one overcomes the five hindrances, then the mind settles down, becomes still, becomes collected, and thereby it becomes a fit instrument for contemplation. And what is to be contemplated are the basic factors of experience, the things that one has to see and know in order to overcome ignorance or delusion. So these are usually summed up in the five aggregates. So the five aggregates is a set of categories which classify all the factors of experience. And then an alternative approach to contemplation is the 6 pairs of internal and external sense bases. The eye and forms, ear and sounds, nose and odors, tongue and taste, body and tactile sensations, mind and mental objects. So one could use either of these schemes, either the 5 aggregates or the 6 internal and external sense bases, or one could use both of them. But what they do is to give one a standpoint for gaining a perspective on the real nature of our experience, particularly in terms of the marks of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Now, as the contemplation becomes steadily focused on either the 5 aggregates or the 6 sense bases, then what starts to emerge, to gain strength, to gain momentum, are the 7 factors of enlightenment. And so the 7 factors of enlightenment emerge. They begin to develop momentum. And then when the 7 factors of enlightenment are developed to a certain pitch of intensity, a certain pitch of a certain degree of fulfillment, then the mind becomes ready for the penetrative realization of the 4 Noble Truths. And then the 4 Noble Truths, these constitute the core or essence of the Dhamma, the Buddha's teaching. In this way we can see, as I said, a certain pattern or progression in the unfolding of the 7 of the 5 groups of factors making up the Dhammanupassana, contemplation of Dhamma. Okay, with this we can turn to our text itself. This is on page 286. We have, how does a monk dwell contemplating, here I use the word phenomena for Dhamma, contemplating phenomena and phenomena. Here a monk dwells contemplating phenomena and phenomena in terms of the 5 hindrances. Okay, how does he do so? Here, when there is sensual desire in him, a monk understands there is sensual desire in me. Or when there is no sensual desire in him, he understands there is no sensual desire in me. And he also understands how unarisen sensual desire arises and how arisen sensual desire is abandoned, and how abandoned sensual desire does not arise again in the future. then the same thing is repeated with regard to the other hindrances. When there is ill will in him, he knows, he understands there is ill will in me, and so on. When there is dullness and drowsiness in him, he understands there is dullness and drowsiness in him. When there is restlessness and remorse in him, he understands there is restlessness and remorse in me. When there is doubt in him, the monk understands there is doubt in me. When there is no doubt in him, he understands there is no doubt in me. He also understands how the unarisen doubt arises, and how arisen doubt is abandoned, and how abandoned doubt does not arise again in the future. So here we have the 5 hindrances. We've already encountered the 5 hindrances in earlier texts. But briefly, this is the way the Buddha has classified or summed up the hindrances, the main hindrances to mental development. We have the 2, what I call the 2 coarse or strong hindrances of the mind. One is sensual desire, which is sort of results from a positive evaluation of the object, taking the object to be desirable, attractive, worthy of pursuit. And then there is ill will, anger, hatred, the impulse to reject the object, to fight with the object, to destroy the object. Okay, so these are the 2, we call the 2 coarse or major defilements. And then there come the 3 subtler defilements, which are sort of manifestations of delusion. One is dullness and drowsiness, sloth and torpor, which is, we call this the 2 factors that lead to rigidity of mind or sluggishness of the mind. And then opposed to them are the 2 factors that lead to excitement of the mind, agitation of mind. This is restlessness and remorse. And then the 5th hindrance is doubt. Now, we have to notice that these 5 hindrances, through the practice of satipatthana, the foundations of mindfulness meditation, the 5 hindrances are not simply to be rejected, to be pushed away, but one uses them as objects of contemplation. And so, when any of these 5 hindrances arise and become prominent in meditation, of course in the early stages one could just try to push the object, push the disturbing thought away and then bring the mind back to the object. But if one of these 5 hindrances becomes very prominent, where it's really obstructing one's ability to focus on the main object, then one leaves the main object aside, puts it on the side, and one just observes whatever factor is functioning as a hindrance. If sensual desire arises, one just observes the desire. If anger and ill will have arisen, one just observes the anger and ill will. If the mind is restless, agitated, one just treats that restless, agitated mind as an object of observation and just observes the agitation of the mind. If the mind is troubled by doubt, indecision, questioning, skepticism, one just treats that doubt, that questioning, that skepticism, just makes it an object of the mind. Okay, so as one makes the 5 hindrances the objects of the mind, then on the one hand, one is gaining insight into the workings of one's own mind. One is coming to see what are the particular factors of mind that are prominent in one's mental makeup? What are the kinds of thoughts that persistently come into the mind? And then when one takes these mental states and turns them into objects, one thereby is depriving them of their power. This is a kind of subtle strategy in overcoming the disturbing factors of the mind. Instead of regarding them as something evil and something that's intrinsically an obstacle to one's meditation practice, one simply flips, we call it flipping the mind around, so that the states that are working in the background, causing the disturbance, are now put into the spotlight. And when they come into the spotlight, they can't create the disturbance that they normally would when they're operating in the background. I think last week I used the analogy or simile of the pickpocket or shoplifter who comes into the shop. Usually the shoplifter likes to pick up attractive items when nobody is looking and take them away. But when we put up these video cameras focusing on the shop, then the shoplifter comes in and looks around and sees the video cameras. Then because he's under the observation, he won't be able to shoplift. And so we could say that this is turning these video cameras on the workings of the mind. And so even when the hindrances are present, one simply observes them, notes them as present, and watches them. If there's even a strong sensual desire, just watch the way that desire works. And then what one finds is that the desire starts to fade away, to become weaker, and then it breaks off, and then the mind goes back to a quiet and concentrated state. If there's anger in the mind, one just watches the anger, watches these bubbling, angry thoughts. And as one does so, because one is observing the actual state of observation is not an angry mind. The angry mind is turned into the object. And when it's turned into the object, then the anger just becomes, you say, an interesting, it's like watching an interesting movie. One doesn't identify with the plot and become sucked into the plot, but one is sitting in one's seat as an observer watching the movie. And so one is watching the angry mind, and then the anger will bubble up and dissipate and vanish. And so this happens with each of the hindrances. And then when the particular hindrance one is observing, when it breaks off and vanishes, then one notes there is no sensual desire in me, no ill will in me, or whatever it is with the other hindrances. Okay, so we have here, we call this 2 levels of observation. The first level is to note whenever a hindrance is present, one notes that it is present. Second level, when the hindrance is absent, when it breaks off and vanishes, then one notes, one is aware, there is no such hindrance in me. But now, we find that the Buddha takes us to a third level in the contemplation of the hindrances. And this is something which is quite unique to the section on Dhammanupassana. We find this in the first four contemplations in different ways, there is an understanding of the conditionality that underlies these particular factors. So this is something we find only in the Dhammanupassana section, not in the other sections. Or at least it's not developed so explicitly in the other sections. But here we find quite explicitly an understanding of the conditionality, the causal relationships that underlie each of the unwholesome factors, that underlie the five aggregates, the six sense bases, and that underlie the seven factors of enlightenment. So in understanding the conditionality of the five hindrances, we're taking first sensual desire, he understands how unarisen sensual desire arises, how arisen sensual desire is abandoned, and how abandoned sensual desire does not arise again in the future. So to fully master this base of mindfulness, one has to understand what are the particular causes and conditions that underlie the arising of sensual desire. So this is an interesting factor or interesting aspect of the Buddha's teaching, where some systems of psychology say that sensual desire is something intrinsic to human nature and separable from human nature. According to the Buddha's teaching, sensual desire arises through particular conditions. Of course, there's the beginning, we call this the beginningless stream of sensual desire, going back life before life before life. That is the deep underlying tendency of sensuality. But what is it that provokes the sensuality which causes it to arise? So the Buddha teaches, in other sutras we see that sensual desire arises through what is called unwise attention to the attractive features of things. And so the condition, the originative condition, the ignition, the key to the ignition of sensual desire is a particular type of perception. It's a perception of sense objects as being desirable and attractive. And this perception occurs because the Buddha says, ayoniso manasikara, unwise attention, improper attention or careless attention, superficial attention. So we attend to things superficially, that is in terms of their surface features, but not in terms of their true characteristics, their in-depth qualities. And so in order to overcome the hindrance of sensual desire, one has to know how arisen sensual desire is abandoned. And the Buddha teaches that arisen sensual desire can be abandoned by attending wisely to the unattractive nature of things. And so at one level, this is used particularly for sexual desire as a form of sensual desire. The Buddha's texts teach the contemplation of the unattractive nature of the body. We've gone through this already. This is contemplating the 32 parts of the body, seeing how the body is made up of hairs on the head, bodily hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, nerves, bone marrow, different organs, different fluids. When one repeatedly trains the mind to observe the body in this way, then sensual desire is deprived of the spark that ignites it. Another way to overcome sensual desire, sort of another antidote to it, is to contemplate one's own death. When one reflects deeply on death, old age, sickness, and death, then that fire or intensity of sensual desire starts to subside. One could also reflect on the impermanence of all sense pleasures, that they're not lasting, insubstantial, not deeply satisfying. So the Buddhist texts, they give different antidotes, different methods to overcome arisen sensual desire. And then it is through the repeated development of these methods, of these contemplations, of these reflections, that abandoned sensual desire does not arise again in the future. And similarly, different methods are used to overcome ill will, but especially the sort of direct antidote to ill will is, this is particularly when the ill will arises towards other people, the direct antidote is developing loving kindness towards others. When one trains the mind in developing the wish, the thought, may all beings be well, may all beings be happy, may all beings be free from harm and suffering, may they enjoy good health, peace of mind, may all of their good wishes be fulfilled. When one practices regularly in this way, then ill will is gradually weakened. And when any ill will arises, then by applying this reflection of loving kindness, one can overcome the ill will. And as one develops the ill will, as one develops the loving kindness, makes it stronger and stronger, eventually the ill will be abandoned to such a degree that it does not arise again in the future. Okay, so similar methods. Each of the five hindrances has its own direct antidote, as well as a variety of other methods that can be used to overcome it. Some weeks ago, months ago, I gave out a handout on the five hindrances, which gave the list of the different factors to be cultivated, that one should cultivate to overcome each of the hindrances. If anybody didn't get it, then next week I will make some more copies and hand them out. Who here comes regularly who didn't get the five hindrances table? So don't hesitate to put up your hands, and I'll get some idea of how many copies to make. Okay, a fair number. Okay, so with regard to each of the five hindrances, one has to understand how this particular hindrance arises. Then one has to understand what is the antidote, the method to apply to abandon that hindrance. And then it's through repeated development of these same methods that these abandoned hindrances do not arise again in the future. Then as one develops particularly insight wisdom, eventually one reaches a point where through direct realization one cuts off each of the hindrances so that this hindrance becomes completely abandoned and can never arise again at any point in the future. This is through developing what's called the four world-transcending paths. These world-transcending paths eradicate the five hindrances so that not even a trace of them remains in the mind. Okay, so then, with regard to each of the hindrances, or with regard to the five hindrances as a whole, we have the stock formula. He dwells contemplating phenomena and phenomena internally. He dwells contemplating phenomena and phenomena externally. Again, I have to say, my confession of ignorance. With regard to the mental phenomena like the five hindrances, I don't know how one could contemplate them externally in the mind of another, apart from being able to judge from another person's behavior whether they are in the grip of those particular hindrances. Maybe that is the way. One could see from the way somebody behaves whether they are in a state of sensual desire or a state of anger. If somebody is dozing off while I'm giving a lecture, I can infer that they're in a state of dullness and drowsiness. If somebody is fiddling around, getting up, standing up, sitting down, rubbing the feet together, then one can infer they're in a state of doubt, a state of restlessness. If somebody is in a state of doubt, sometimes the facial expression can indicate that. Even sometimes if I'm giving a talk and somebody asks a question and then I answer it, I could see from the expression on the face that they're not really satisfied with my answer. Yeah.
I was thinking about that. It seems to me that you know that do it internally to understand the finances inside of you, but also you can understand externally your own facial expression, changing how anger puts sternness on your external appearance.
So to understand...
Well, to understand internally how it affects you, how your anger will affect your stomach tightening, but also externally how it affects your facial expressions, and to observe yourself internally and externally how it affects you.
That's a puzzle. It's a good explanation. I'm not sure whether that's the actual intention. Would that work with regard to feelings?
I would think if you're always aware of anything that's going on, it always has an external action to it.
It's a possibility. It's a good way of explaining it. Okay, anyway, you can just go on. So he dwells contemplating phenomena and phenomena internally, externally, both internally and externally. Or he dwells contemplating in phenomena, their nature of arising, their nature of vanishing, contemplating in phenomena, their nature of both arising and vanishing. This is actually an interesting point, because while any of these five hindrances are present, one makes it an object. Okay, so one knows, for example, there is sensual desire in me, there is ill will in me. Then, instead of simply observing this bare hindrance, one pays attention to the fact that this hindrance is always occurring in the mode of a thought. And this thought, through which the hindrance is occurring, is actually not one steady thought, but it's a sequence of thoughts. And each of these thoughts is something that arises and vanishes, arises and vanishes. And so while this particular hindrance is present, say sensual desire has arisen in me, I turn it into an object, and then I note that sensual desire as something which is constantly arising and vanishing, arising and vanishing. And so I'm noting now impermanence within that central desire. Again, if anger has arisen, the anger actually takes the form of angry thoughts. And so I watch these thoughts. This thought arises and it's gone. The next thought arises and it's gone. Next thought arises and it's gone. And so I'm just turning that hindrance into an example of an impersonal object of the mind, which is exhibiting the characteristic of impermanence. And as I do so, the hindrance will subside, it loses its force, vanishes into the current or stream of mind, and then I just continue to watch the stream of mind arising and passing, without the sensual desire, without the anger. Okay, so he dwells contemplating the nature of arising and vanishing, or else the mindfulness that there are phenomena is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and repeated mindfulness. So if the five hindrances are present, whatever is present, I just establish the mindfulness that this is a phenomena. One just sort of deprives it of its emotional power and just turns it into a bare phenomena present to the mind. Okay, so in this way he dwells independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a monk dwells, contemplating phenomena in terms of the five hindrances. Okay, at this point I'll ask whether there's any questions on anything that I've just covered in the five hindrances. Okay, John?
Something I'm just wondering, why is it that with the development of concentration and then insight, the hindrances do vanish forever? What happens to cause them to vanish permanently?
Okay, the overcoming of the hindrances and the other defilements takes place in several stages. The first stage is what is called stream entry. This is the first, we call this the first breakthrough to the ultimate truth of the Dhamma. Now, stream entry, with the attainment of stream entry, one sees the truth of the Dhamma for the first time. And with the seeing of the truth, let me just first say, the hindrances and the other defilements fall into two categories. This is my own way of understanding them. One category are those which are rooted in misunderstanding, wrong understanding. The others are more deeply rooted defilements, which are, you could say, are the instinctive tendencies of the mind. Now, with the breakthrough to stream entry, one gains this first glimpse of the ultimate truth of the Dhamma. And so this breakthrough will eliminate the cognitive defilements, the defilements which are manifestations of wrong understanding. So of the five hindrances, what is eliminated is doubt, the hindrance of doubt. Because now one has seen the truth of the Dhamma, and so one has no doubt that the Buddha is enlightened one, because this is the truth that the Buddha has taught. one has no truth about the Dhamma, the Buddha's teaching. But this teaching gives the guidelines for following the path and for seeing the ultimate truth. So now one has seen it. And one has no doubt that there is an Aryan Sangha, not the monastic order, but other beings who have practiced the path and realized the same truth. So one has confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, no longer any doubt. Okay, among some of the other groups of the mental defilements, one has, for example, the fetter of view of self. So with the attainment of stream entry, one eradicates view of self permanently. One can never fall into a view of self again. One has the fetter of believing in rules and observances, thinking that following just rules and observances, rituals, other types of religious observances, this might be the way to enlightenment. One now has seen the truth, and that one knows that it's not just through following rules, precepts, observances, rituals, that one could reach enlightenment. Of course, certain rules and precepts are necessary as part of the path, but it's the clinging to these rules and precepts as being sufficient to constitute the path that one puts away. Okay, so these are defilements due to misapprehension, to wrong views and misapprehension. These are overcome with the first breakthrough. But there still remain these deep, what I call the instinctual defilements, like the tendency to sensual desire, to anger and ill will, to jealousy, envy, selfishness, arrogance, pride, conceit, all of these other tendencies. Okay, so to eliminate them, one has to go back and develop the same path of insight, until one makes a second breakthrough. It says that the second breakthrough doesn't eliminate any of these defilements or fetters permanently, but it weakens them. Okay, then one comes and develops the same path again. When one reaches the third breakthrough, then one cuts off certain defilements permanently. Sensual desire and ill will are permanently eliminated. Why this comes about, your question, how it comes about sort of in the deep recesses of the mind, I don't know actually. But what we can say is that it is the insight into this ultimate truth has the effect of cutting off these defilements permanently. Okay, so with the third breakthrough, one cuts off certain other defilements so that they never can arise again. But there's still a certain residue of defilements, particularly conceit, a tendency to restlessness, ignorance. But then as one goes on cultivating the path to the next breakthrough, the fourth one, then one will eliminate those defilements permanently. And so it's the same realization at each of the four stages, but it seems that at each stage, so the content of the realization is the same, but its force or power is increased at each higher breakthrough. And since the force of that breakthrough is stronger, it's able to uproot defilements at deeper layers of the mind, until at the last stage, it's actually the ignorance that maintains all these defilements. Maybe this is the key, that all of the defilements ultimately come out of ignorance. And so, as one makes this breakthrough to realization, one is eliminating a certain degree of ignorance, the ignorance that sustains those other defilements. And then at the fourth stage, one eliminates the ignorance completely, and so all of the defilements that go along with ignorance are now permanently eradicated. This is the way I would explain it.
And at the first level, extreme entry, it sounds like to characterize what you're saying at that level, it's just the power of conviction or belief in the efficacy starts to erode illusion or ignorance and to banish the hindrances to begin with. It sounds like at that point it's occurring on a conceptual level.
It's not just a conceptual level, and it's not just a conviction. We say that the stream enterer is one who gains Dhamma Chakku, which means the eye of Dhamma. So he actually sees the Dhamma. He sees the truth. And it's what's the distinctive characteristic of the attainment of stream entry is called dasana, which means seeing or vision. So one has the seeing of the truth, the direct vision of the truth, and that is what eliminates the hindrances, the defilements that are based on wrong cognition. It's not just a conviction, but it's an actual seeing of the truth.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody else have a question? Okay, somebody in the back.
Well, it's really awareness. It comes to the realization of
Wait, take the microphone.
It comes to the realization of awareness. Once you have the awareness, it loses its charge. It's still there, it doesn't really matter anymore. Would you perceive it that way?
Awareness is quite a broad word. It can be used in different senses. What particular nuance or sense are you giving to the word?
Well, when I say awareness, if you're aware of sexual,
If you're aware of sexual desire,
Yeah.
and you connect with the impermanence of it, you may still have sexual desire. It just loses its charge in the sense that you don't have the same attachment to it. And it's an increased expansive awareness, whereas it just doesn't have the same importance.
I'd say maybe this is the case maybe at one particular stage of practice, but as the insight and realization goes deeper, then one actually is able to develop the mind to the point where, as it says, the arisen sensual desire is abandoned, and the abandoned sensual desire does not arise again in the future. So one, through the application of the appropriate antidote or the mental medicine, one is able to eliminate that particular mental tendency, at first to keep it under control so that it doesn't arise again, and then eventually one develops the insight into the truth to such a deep level that these tendencies, mental tendencies, don't arise again in the future.
But isn't it innate within human nature to reproduce? And why would you want to eliminate that from human beings?
Okay, first, according to the Buddha's teaching, sensual desire, the sexual desire, we could say it's present in the mind through beginningless time, since from life before life, we've had at least a tendency to sexual desire. But according to the Buddha's teaching, it's not innate in the sense that it's a necessary component of the mind. It's a tendency which can be eliminated that the mind is completely free of sensual desire.
But I mean, if you take any of our emotions like anger, for
Yeah.
example, I'm just using sexualism, let's shift to anger.
Okay.
Anger being a relative reality, I mean, it's absolutely necessary in certain circumstances and a hindrance in others. And just to observe anger without defining, or let's say attaching one limit or the other without reason, moving not towards the absolute but as human being. I don't see why you want to eliminate anger entirely from your being. It's a relative aspect of being human in order to survive in the world.
Well, I think this is where the Buddhist teaching would take a different perspective on this. And what we would say from the Buddhist perspective is that anger itself is always an unwholesome state. It's a state which tends to be harmful to oneself and to harmful to others. So this is my own opinion here, that one should be able to act effectively within the world, and the fact that one is working to overcome anger doesn't mean that one becomes completely compliant and accepting of everything that's going on in the world. One should be able to stand up, for example, and oppose, say, things, actions by the government, actions by another person, actions by social groups that one thinks are wrong, immoral, unjust, and stand up and oppose them effectively and even forcefully. But without, when we speak about anger, what we mean is ill will. That means having negative feelings, wishes to harm and to destroy the person that one is opposing.
The negative effects of anger.
Well, also anger as being a quality which is intrinsically harmful to oneself, because it...
And yes, that's where I lose here, because I see anger as being what I call immature anger and mature anger.
Yeah.
Immature anger is where you're using anger foolishly, whereas you can use anger to create positive change in your own life and other lives, to change the overall effect. And to say that, I mean, I just see it as a tool, and it could be used as a double-edged sword. It can be used in a very negative way, but I think anger could motivate you to create positive change in the world and in yourself.
What I would say is that it might be a matter of semantics, but when the anger is understood as a mental state which sort of takes control of the mind and which dominates you so that you are no longer in charge of your own actions, that is what we understand as anger in the Buddhist text. Okay, now what I would say is that this talk about overcoming anger does not exclude being able to understand things that are happening in the world, to understand them accurately, to be able to diagnose them effectively, and then being willing to stand up and to take a stand of opposing, say, policies, principles, actions that one considers unjust, harmful to others, and to work even forcefully to present alternative visions and ways, courses of action. And so we could say people like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, these are people who, for the most part, act without anger in the sense that we understand this quality of ill will, hatred towards another person, resentment towards another person. And yet, even though they are acting without anger, or at least trying to act without anger, at the same time they're able to act very efficiently and effectively to bring about major changes in the course of world events.
I heard that was they wanting to eliminate anger or eliminate sexual desires. And I guess to me it's not so much wanting to do it, but rather by following this path it will happen.
Yeah.
But an accurate description of you're not eliminating the desire to eliminate.
Yeah, one doesn't really dwell so much on the desire to eliminate, though I would say maybe different people have different approaches. But one doesn't dwell on the desire, but one does have to, this is part of the right effort. The text speaks about one arouses a desire for the non-arising of unwholesome states. And so one does generate that desire. So perhaps one would say that one doesn't dwell on that desire, but just as one practices, then these states tend naturally to weaken and to fall away.
So maybe a parallel might be they develop samadhi, for example, like the desire to develop samadhi, but you don't develop samadhi through that desire, but rather you develop it by creating the conditions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this might also indicate how, at least one way in which one overcomes these qualities like the five hindrances. It's not so much that one is focusing on eliminating sensual desire, eliminating ill will, but one wants to develop samadhi and insight. And so one uses that desire, the desire to experience stronger, purer states of bliss, of happiness, as a way to overcome states of lower enjoyment, lower pleasure. And so by the desire for the happiness of samadhi, then one overcomes the happiness of the sensual pleasures. But if one is dwelling on, I want to achieve samadhi, one won't achieve it. One has to let the mind just rest very softly without any desire, then one can enter samadhi.
Thank you. I just want to see if I understand correctly how we're defining mental object or mind object. Is it simply what one's mind is focused upon, like rising and falling of the breath, for example, or is it something more complex?
Now, in relation to Dhammanupassana, I'm not using mental object or mind object as the translation for Dhamma in Dhammanupassana. I'm not sure the context you brought in the expression mind object, but when we speak of...
In the context of what I heard before.
Okay, what I say is that Dhammanupassana is not mind object, but it is these groups of phenomena which have been organized from the perspective of the Dhamma as the Buddha's teaching, in order to bring about realization of the Dhamma, which is the Four Noble Truths. Now, when we use the expression mind object, which I will come to, then it's any object of the mind, of thought, not specifically a meditation object, but anything that one might think of, anything that becomes the object of the mind is a mind object. Anything apart from the object of the five senses that becomes an object of the mind. So any kind of concept, idea, mental image, judgment, proposition, all of that is a mind object. Any mental state, yeah. But I will be coming to the mind objects when we get to group number 3. Okay, let us go on then. I want to come to the 5 aggregates. Okay, now when the five hindrances subside and then the mind becomes well focused, then one moves into the contemplation of, we call a kind of global contemplation of bodily and mental phenomena. And then one particular scheme, called as the most prominent scheme that the Buddha has used for classifying all phenomena, is the five aggregates. We will come into a more detailed treatment of the five aggregates in the next chapter, which is the chapter on wisdom. But for now, we could just give a kind of general overview of the five aggregates. Okay, so actually these are called, technically it's called the five aggregates of clinging, or the five aggregates subject to clinging. In Pali we have the expression panchupadana kanda. The word pancha means five, upadana means clinging, and kanda are aggregates. And so the way I would understand this is that the Buddha has taken all of the different potential objects of clinging. And basically what the clinging is, the clinging that's involved here, are things that one can cling to with the sense that this is my personal identity. This is what I truly am. This is mine. This is I. This is myself. So according to the Buddha's teaching, all of these ideas that we hold to with attachment, with cherishing, these are forms of clinging. And the notions, the concepts that are the basis of this clinging are the concepts of mine, what is mine, what I am, what is myself. And according to the Buddha, whatever one identifies as myself, whatever one takes to be I or mine, falls into these five aggregates. And so the Buddha has laid out the scheme of the five aggregates in order to show the things that we cling to as being myself, and also to use them as a framework for showing that the idea of self is a delusion, because the five types of things that we cling to as myself turn out upon investigation to be not myself, to be not I. Do you want to join our class? So the Buddha has laid out this very simple framework for classifying all of the different factors of experience, for highlighting different aspects of experience. And so the five aggregates move in a particular progression, it seems, from the coarser to the subtler. We start off with the Rupa Kanda. This is the aggregate of form. This is material form, bodily form. So all physical phenomena fall within the aggregate of form, material form, which the Buddha says consists ultimately of the four primary elements: earth, water, fire, and air, or in other words, solidity, liquidity, air or gas, and energy. And then there are different material phenomena derived from the four primary elements. And the form instance of the form aggregate that's closest to ourselves is our own physical body. The second aggregate is the aggregate of feeling. Now, I should explain that this term aggregate is used, khanda, in the sense of a collection or compilation, since each of these five aggregates is not just a simple entity, but each of the five aggregates is a broad category into which many phenomena, different phenomena, can be classified. So the form aggregate includes everything that has material form, everything that's a combination of the four elements and their derivatives. The aggregate of feeling includes all the different feelings, and feelings here is intended not in the sense of emotion, but in the sense of what I called last week, I called it the tone of experience, the felt tone of experience. So we have feeling is divided into pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neutral feeling. Feeling neither pleasant nor painful. Or else it's feeling arisen through the eye contact, feeling arisen through ear contact, feeling arisen through nose contact, feeling arisen through tongue contact, feeling arisen through body contact, feeling arisen through mind contact. So we have many different feelings depending on its felt tone, depending on the sense faculty through which it arises. But since they're all different ways in which we experience the tone of the object, they're all classified within the category of feelings. Then we have next the sanya khanda. Sanya means, I translate it as perception. And so perception, or sanya, is the mental factor through which one distinguishes the properties of an object. We could say it's the mental factor which picks out the marks, the distinctive qualities of the object, which merges these qualities together in order to form a general label, a general concept to apply to an object. And also it's a particular mental factor which is most prominent in recognition. So, when I see this particular object in front of me, the object itself is a form, but it's through perception, through sanya, that I label this as a cup. So, I take this visual perception and then turn it into a mental perception with the designation cup. And then when the same cup is brought out every week, then I recognize it as being the same cup. If one week Venerable Sudama were to bring out, say, a red and blue cup, then I would identify it as a cup, but I would think, this is a cup I haven't seen before. I don't recognize it. It's something new. And so when I meet a person for the first time, then I look at certain features of the person's face, their body, and so I'm perceiving their distinctive features. Then the next time I see that person, maybe it might be a year later, I'm walking down the street in New York, that person is walking from the opposite direction. I met the person only one time, but I'm able to recognize the person. That is the work of sanya, perception. The fourth aggregate is a rather comprehensive group, which we translate as volitional formation. It's not such a clear term. But this means all of the factors that are involved in the way we act in response to the things that we perceive. The main constituent amongst the volitional formations is chaitana, which is what we translate as volition. Volition is what moves us to action. It's the impulse to action. And then all of the other factors of the mind that go along with volition come within the same aggregate. Deliberation or thinking about the object. Then qualities like the unwholesome qualities like greed, hatred, delusion. These are volitional formations, as well as their opposites, the impulse to generosity, to kindness, to wisdom. So all these motivational factors are all included amongst the volitional formations. Then the fifth aggregate is the awareness that arises, or maybe call this the light of awareness that arises based on any of the senses. And I say that it illuminates that particular field, the particular objective field which is available through that sense faculty. And so the Buddha's texts distinguish the different types of consciousness on the basis of the sense faculty through which they arise. Thus we have eye consciousness. This is the awareness that arises based on the eye and that illuminates visible forms. Ear consciousness, the awareness based on the ear that illuminates sound so that I'm able to hear sound. Nose consciousness, the awareness based on the nose that to illuminate odors. That sounds a bit odd. Okay, the awareness based on the nose that is able to open up the whole sphere, domain of odors and scents. Tongue consciousness, the awareness based on the tongue that is able to, when does it illuminate taste? We can say that illuminates the field of taste. In other words, that enables one to experience taste. Body consciousness, the consciousness based on the sense of touch that enables one to experience textures and tactile sensations. And then the sixth is what is called mind consciousness. This is the inner consciousness that illuminates one's own inner mental processes, so that we're able to reflect back upon our experience, to reflect back upon our own minds, and to be aware of our thoughts, to be aware of ideas, concepts, judgments, mental images, and so on. And so we have the 6 types of consciousness. Okay, now though we analyze the experience into the 5 aggregates, but in experience itself, these 5 aggregates are always merged together. We could say that the aggregates, the scheme of the 5 aggregates, this is what becomes evident when we perform an analytical operation on experience. But when we're actually undergoing the experience is always an interwoven whole of the 5 aggregates. So the 5 aggregates appear only upon reflection. For example, let's take a concrete example. Again, we go back to the example. I'm seeing the cup. Okay, within this experience of seeing the cup, there is the aggregate of form. What is the aggregate of form? There is first the cup itself, that's a material object. Then there is the eye, through which I see the form. And then there's, of course, the whole body has to be present as the support for the perception of the cup. Okay, so there's the material form, physical form, in the act of seeing the cup. Then there will be some feeling. Seeing the cup, if I'm thirsty, really thirsty, then a pleasant feeling. If this cup was on the table, maybe when my wife left me, we were sitting at the table together with the cup out, or when somebody came up and spoke nastily to me, then the cup will ignite to set off an unpleasant feeling, maybe unpleasant memories, or maybe even no memory, but just the simple perception of the cup becomes unpleasant in itself. If I'm not really thirsty, the cup is just put out here, then it will be a neutral feeling, neither pleasant nor painful. Okay, then there is the perceptual act that identifies this object as a cup. That's the aggregate of perception. Again, if I'm thirsty, I look at the cup, then there comes the impulse, the will, to pick up the cup in order to take a drink. That's volitional formation. And then there is the awareness of this whole experience. That will be first the visual consciousness is what makes possible a perception of the cup. Then they'll actually be followed by a mental consciousness which goes with the volition, the intention to pick up the cup and drink it. Okay, so we have in this way, within what seems to be a simple experience, the analysis into 5 aggregates. Okay, now what is taking place with the meditator, as the mind is focused, settled down, concentrated, then the meditator turns that focused mind upon his or her own experience and begins to dissect this experience, to break it down into the 5 aggregates. And so as the meditator is sitting there, he'll be aware of the form aggregate as the body which is sitting. Then he could go deeper, more deeper, by investigating the form aggregate in terms of the 4 elements. But at a simple level, we'll just keep the awareness at the recognition that this is form, bodily form, which is present. Then, as the meditator is observing, He'll be noting the different feelings that arise. There could be painful feelings, maybe pain in the legs and the back. Pleasant feelings as the mind is well focused, well concentrated. Whatever feeling arises, the meditator will identify, this is feeling. Again, the meditator will move into the recognition of the object. For example, if the main object is the breath, in and out breath, then what is aware of the breath is perception. Perception is what is noting in breath, in, out. Then the meditator will focus the volitional formations, the intention, keeping the mind on the object, or observing the experience in order to see it in terms of the five aggregates. That is a volition or an intention. And then there will be the awareness of all of this. That is the aggregate of consciousness. And so in this way, the meditator is breaking this apparently compact experience down into the five aggregates. And then the meditator can home in on any of these five aggregates and observe the arising and passing away of that aggregate. Observe that this aggregate that appears to be something solid and lasting is just a process of phenomena arising and vanishing. And so one sees each of the aggregates as being actually a stream or a current of factors arising and passing away. And then from there the meditator can move from impermanence into suffering, dukkha, and then into anatta, or non-self. But I don't want to go into that right now. Okay, and so we have the Buddha saying the monk dwells contemplating phenomena in terms of the five aggregates. And how does he dwell contemplating phenomena in terms of the five aggregates subject to clinging? Here a monk understands such is form, such its origin, such its passing away. The same with feeling, with perception, with volitional formations, with consciousness. One notes each of the five aggregates. That, we could say, is the first level. One level is simply to note, to identify what is the particular aggregate, to home in on that aggregate in terms of its distinguishing quality, so that one could distinguish what is the material component of this experience, what is the way this experience is felt. It's the felt tone of the experience or feeling. What is the element of identification, of recognition, of cognition taking place? That is perception. What is the way bending the mind? The mind is being bent towards this experience. That is the volition. And what is the element of awareness in this experience? That is consciousness. So in this way, one is identifying each of the five aggregates. Then the next level is noting the origin and passing away of the aggregate, seeing its arising and vanishing, its arising and vanishing. And so, in this way, he dwells contemplating phenomena internally, that is with regard to oneself, externally, in regard to others. Here's the way I would understand this. Of course, I can't, at least I think I can't experience somebody else's feelings, perceptions, volitions, But I can do a kind of mental exercise of, please forgive me, no offense intended, but dissecting or analyzing any other person into 5 aggregates. So eliminating the perception or concept of self in regard to others by reflecting upon them as being collections or combinations of these 5 aggregates. And so I do this internally, directly with regard to myself, 5 aggregates here, then everyone else just combinations or collections of the 5 aggregates. And so then there's no clinging to a self in regard to others. Okay, the text is abridged here, so he dwells contemplating phenomena internally, externally, both. In regard to the phenomena, he dwells contemplating the nature of arising, he dwells contemplating the nature of vanishing, he dwells contemplating the nature of both arising and vanishing. So this is the origin and passing away of the 5 aggregates. Or else the mindfulness that there are phenomena is simply established in regard to the 5 aggregates. So instead of distinguishing them as internal, external, arising and vanishing, I just note there are these phenomena, the 5 aggregates. I'm not even differentiating the experience into individual aggregates, but I'm just taking all of the 5 together simultaneously as mere phenomena. Or else he dwells independent, not clinging to anything in the world, and that's how he dwells contemplating phenomena in terms of the 5 aggregates. Okay, at this point I will pause and then ask whether there are any questions. John has a question here.
I have often wondered why people cling. I have sort of systemized it because of a recognition of human finitude, human limitations. So I was wondering from a Buddhist point of view, maybe there is an explanation for why it is that we want to cling.
The way I would understand it, I don't know whether this question is quite addressed in the Buddhist text, but this is the way I would understand it, that, so to say, the fundamental fact about human nature is the absence of any true permanent self. And so there is, at the core of our being, a voidness, a lack, an emptiness. So this is shunyata, emptiness. And what I would say is that we have at some level an awareness of that emptiness. It's not in no way a conscious awareness, but there's some kind of deep sense that there's no solid core, nothing solid at the core of our being, and that this induces a deep fear, a deep kind of, maybe we use the expression of primordial anxiety, that there's nothing there. And because there's nothing there, then we feel we have to fill that void or hole of emptiness with something. And what is there to fill it with? What is there to fill it with is what appears to us, what is present in our concrete experience. And so, without using an analytical scheme like the 5 aggregates, but whatever can be clung to, we cling to. And then we try to give ourselves some solidity by taking this to be mine, I, myself. And so whatever we cling to turns out to be one or another of the five aggregates. And so we cling either to the body, or to feelings, to perceptions, to volitions, to consciousness. Maybe different people cling to different things, like the person who's very sensual or not sensual, but very athletic, maybe will cling to the body. Or maybe maybe the male who's athletic will cling to the body. A woman might cling to the body, trying to be beautiful, to show herself as beautiful. So what's underlying that is the sense, I am the body. People who are more aesthetic in orientation, more emotional, will cling to feelings. So we have people who are seeking like highs of bliss and pleasure, the connoisseurs of food, the art. So maybe that will come with perception. Okay, then the aesthetic person, the person who delights in perceptions of form, maybe in the arts, okay, that would be the person who clings to perception. Then the person who's the man of action, the one who likes to get things done out in the world, the one who wants to mold and transform the world, that would be the person that I tend to identify with volition. And then maybe the thinker, the philosopher, that would be the person who clings to consciousness. Don't take these two literally and insist on them. There's a lot of room for flexibility from one of these realms to another. So you could just see how people will tend to identify with different aggregates depending on their disposition.
But what you're saying is that at the bottom, the root cause is perhaps conscious recognition that there is nothing there, some recognition of emptiness.
This is the way I would conjecture, my own conjecture.
Thank you.
But I don't think anything is presented like that explicitly in the text. There's somebody in the back, there's a question. Tower.
I just wanted to say something in addition to what was discussed. Don't we also claim because we have this thirst of defining myself, I'm somebody different from everyone else in the world, and these are the things that define me. So we have this thing that I have to define myself, I have to identify myself, and as we explained, people with different nature, they identify themselves with different things.
Yeah.
And basically the country came from the Pali, that you are so and so, you are different, you are this, which takes place in our unconsciousness, and we are like, yes, I'm an energetic person, or I'm an intelligent person, things like that. And that leads to more clinging because we want to solidify our definition of ego and self and things like that.
Yeah, that's basically what I said, pretty much the same thing that I said.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're going to have to stop now, so we'll end with the sharing of the merits, and then we'll continue next week, continue with the Dhamma, contemplation of the Dhamma section. Okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the deities, the Buddhas, the fierce spirits, the Nagas, the dragon spirits, and with all other beings, wishing them to be well and happy, and especially for the devas to protect the Buddha's teaching. Akasata Chabhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mankarang Etavatacharam Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacharam Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacharam Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Sata Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vichihetato Hetantare Satakai Upapanna Rupiya Rupicha Asanya Sanino Tukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibutin